Thanks for joining. This is the first of these types of webinars that we've done, so we hope that you'll find it helpful and that you'll give feedback so that we can know how we can continually improve in presenting important topics to our alumni. My name is Steve Castle and I'm the Alumni Director here at SAU, and today's webinar is brought to you by the Office of Career Development and Alumni Relations, so Chad Melton, Anna Tabone, and Becca Zrake. As a fellow SAU grad myself, I know the prospect of loans coming due can be stressful and overwhelming, with so much to consider and a lack of clarity on where to start. Although you each have unique situations, I hope today will be helpful in providing a broad overview that will give you perspective and clarity of what makes the most sense for you. We want you to have wisdom as you tackle the debt and also position yourself to live out well the passions that God's placed within you. During this webinar, notice that there's a place at the bottom to make comments, and you can interact during the presentation, and also a place for questions. The specific questions for our presenter will be fielded at the end, so if there are questions he hasn't addressed during his talk, near the end, please send your questions through that link. If there are other issues or comments throughout this webinar, whether that's I'm having trouble hearing the audio or anything else, you can make those comments at any time. Also, if there's anything you missed or you think this information will be helpful for some of your friends who were unable to join today, this webinar is being recorded and the YouTube link will be emailed out to you once that's put together. All right, so that's enough from me. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Dave Globig. Dr. Globig has been teaching at Spring Arbor University since January of 1984. He has his doctorate in business administration. He's a member of the American Institute of CPAs and is a licensed certified financial planner. Together, he and his wife have 6 children and have also fostered 30 children. He cares about tackling debt because he knows setting yourself up well financially frees you to care well for others and live in generous ways that can bless others. So thanks so much for taking the time to share today, Dr. Globig.
Well, thank you. I'd like to first of all give a little history on what we find with how we get the loans. We'll talk a little bit about that, then we'll talk about different ways of repaying it. Just want to reference something I just came across this last week with the August 2016 edition of Money magazine, obviously very timely since we're not even in August yet. Just gives a little bit of reference. It shows that if someone has a $40,000 federal plus loan, they'll be paying $485 a month over the next 10 years, which will include $18,000 of interest. If they do a home equity loan, they can reduce their interest by about $6,000 and reduce their payments about $50. So we can see either way we're talking about pretty significant payments on these. Also, it tells us that the federal plus loans average about 8%. Private loans are starting at 2.9% and averaging a little over 5%. Home equity loans also averaging 5.4%. Just gives you an idea of what we're seeing in today's market as far as how those loans are handled. We plan to look at today is, first of all, the history of loans, subsidized versus unsubsidized loans, Stafford loans, plus loans, Perkins loans. Then we'll look at some of the options for repaying these, different ways of postponing the repayment, how we can consolidate, and then some recommendations on how to handle loans with a short summary. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of what we're looking at. First thing we're looking at here is the history. The history of loans, these were initiated, the Federal Family Education Loan was initiated in 1965, so it's been around a little over 50 years, and it was eliminated in June of 2010, replaced. We also have the William Ford Federal Direct Loan Program was created in 1993, and all loans, federal student loans, as of July of 2010, became direct loans from the federal government, not from other organizations, but from the federal government. We find that in 2014-15, the most recent date we have, the loans average more than $30,000 for college graduates. So it's become a fairly significant factor. The total student debt in 2012 was $1.2 trillion, which, to keep it in perspective, that's more than the total auto debt or more than the total credit card debt. So they become a pretty significant portion of a lot of people's finances. The Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010 reduced the payments to 10% of discretionary income and allowed for loan forgiveness after 20 years. We can see that there's been a number of amendments in this program since it started. Each amendment since 1993, which is almost 25 years, has improved the repayment, made it a little easier on the borrowers to not have to pay quite as much as they had previously. First, we're going to look at subsidized. First, understanding the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized. And a subsidized loan simply means that the loan interest will be paid by the federal government until the loan comes due. Unsubsidized means the loan interest is accumulating until it's paid. So they both have interest, but the subsidized are being paid by the government, unsubsidized is being paid by the borrower. So we see there's a big difference. Given a choice, of course, everyone would like subsidized, but financially some are not allowed to have subsidized. Subsidized loans are made primarily to undergraduate students based on financial need. As we said before, the Department of Education pays that interest while it's deferred, while they're in school, as well as 6 months grace period. As we can see, this is paid until that loan is actually due. Unsubsidized loans are made to undergraduate and graduate students, and they're not based on need. The borrower is paying the loan interest while it's deferred. So if it's deferred for 3 or 4 or 5 years, there could be a good amount of interest accumulating during that period of time. Stafford loans. Stafford loans are made to dependent students. They can borrow up to $30,000, but only $23,000 of these loans can be subsidized. Independent students who are not dependent for their parents, can borrow up to $57,500, but again, only $23,000 of these can be subsidized. Graduate students can borrow up to $138,500, but only $65,000 of these are subsidized. So we can see, even if someone has loans, some of it may be subsidized and some may be unsubsidized. So the unsubsidized is accumulating interest while you're in school. Then we have PLUS loans. They're made to graduate professionals or parents of undergraduate dependent students. It's based on your credit history. Good credit history, you're much better shape for borrowing than if you have a poor credit history, you may not be able to borrow. They're used to cover costs that are not already included in the student's financial aid package, and they charge higher interest than the Stafford loans. PLUS loans are normally unsubsidized. Parent PLUS loans, they again need a good credit history, and the student has to be enrolled at least half-time. Graduate PLUS loans, again, need a good credit history, and they have to be enrolled at least half-time. So if you drop below half-time, the deferral would stop on those and your payments would be immediately becoming due. The maximum PLUS loans, there's no federal limitation. The school determines this, but these loans can be used to cover tuition, room and board, books, supplies, and school fees. So it gives you a lot of access to funds to take care of some of these that weren't covered otherwise. Perkins loans. Perkins loans have a fixed interest rate of 5% based on students with exceptional financial needs, and the interest is subsidized, and the repayment options are less flexible. It's more of locked in. For undergraduate students with limited financial need, up to $5,500 per year for a total of $27,500, which would be over a 5-year period. Graduate students, again, limited based on your financial need, up to $8,000 per year with a limit of $60,000. So that gives us the overview of the types of loans students can get, which ones are available for undergraduate or graduate students, depending on whether they're dependent or they're independent. Let's spend a bulk of our time talking about repayments. Your standard repayments are fixed of at least $50 a month, and you're paying all the interest and principal over a 10-year period. So, as we said before, if we had a certain person had a loan of $40,000 based on the PLUS loan amount, it would be $485 per month. So we can see, depending on how much you borrow, your payments would be more or less, and you'd have the full amount paid within 10 years. Sometimes students like to go with a graduated payment. Graduated payments start lower, and they increase every 2 years, so that you'd have larger payments later on. I had one of these as far as a house loan back a number of years ago, where the payments started at a low rate, and as in graduated payments here, the initial payments have to at least cover the interest, but with the graduated payments, you have to be aware that the final payments will be higher than you would with standard payments. If your first payments are less, they're going to have to collect the same amount of money over the period of time. Your later payments are obviously going to have to be more. So be aware, graduated payments will be larger at the end than they would with standard payments. So it sounds good to start with lower rate when you have lower income. As your income grows, you're able to handle those payments, but the cost of it is you're going to have larger payments at the end. Extended repayments. Sometimes because of the amount of loan, it can be extended as long as 30 years, as long as they have at least $30,000 in loans. As we can see with the average loans we have, that's pretty common at this time. They can either be fixed or they can be graduated. So your extended payments can be fixed or graduated. Fixed, as we said, you're locked in with the same amount every month. Graduating, you start lower, and then increase every 2 years, and to take care of that way. But once again, as I mentioned, with graduated payments, your final payments, of course, are going to be higher than they would have been with a standard payment. If you pay less in the early years, you're going to have to pay more in the later years. It's the same amount being repaid, it's just you're paying less on principal in the initial years than what you paid later on. Some other repayment options we have. There's a number of income-driven repayment plans. They call it income contingent repayment as one of the methods we have. There's an old income-based repayment plan, and then we have a new income-based repayment plan with a different set of arrangements for those, and also pay-as-you-earn. Pay-as-you-earn, where as you earn more, you're paying more on those as well. And then also we have revise as you earn. So there's a lot of different payment options people have based on their income and being able to take care of the payments with more ease than they would otherwise. Also, the income contingent repayment, which began in 1994. This is only for direct loans from the federal government. It includes the direct consolidation loans of your parents' plus loans. Discretionary income, they look at your discretionary income. It's reduced by the Health and Human Services poverty line. And so as your income is less, you have less payment. As you have higher income, you'll be making more payment. The required payment is 20% of your discretionary income. So if your discretionary income goes up, your payments will be going up accordingly. Interest on those is going to be capitalized up to 10% of your original loan amount. So some of the interest that have not been paid will be capitalized, added to the principal with the payment of this loan. The maximum repayment with this option would be for 25 years. So we can see a different length of time available. The standard we mentioned originally was 10 years. With this contingent plan, it's 25 years. Then pay as you earn. This began back about 10 years ago. It's only for direct loans, except for parents plus loans or consolidated loans. Looking at discretionary income, and you're reduced by 1.5 times the Health and Human Services poverty line. So as you look at the poverty line, and if your income is not exceeding that, your payment's going to be reduced accordingly. You're required to pay 10% of your discretionary income. So this would be helpful if your income wasn't as high, not have to pay as much. Again, the government's paying the interest on these subsidized loans for the first 3 years. After that, the borrower would be repaying all of these. They have a maximum repayment of 20 years. Again, notice this is more than the standard 10-year period. Then we got new income-based repayment for borrowers after 2014. So as we can see here, this would include for recent graduates. Some of your loans would fall under this, possibly some would fall under the older option. It's only for direct loans plus the parent plus loans and consolidated parent loans. Again, discretionary income, income is reduced by 1.5 times of the poverty level. That's used quite often as the guideline as far as what people can afford to repay. And they're expected to pay 10% of the discretionary income. So you look at your discretionary income after looking at that adjustment, and you're paying 10% of that towards your loan. Again, the government pays interest on these subsidized loans for the first 3 years. After that, the borrower will be paying that. And again, your maximum repayment period is 20 years. Let's look at some of the ways to postpone the repayment of student loans. The first we would have would be a grace period. When a person graduates, most of you graduated in May, you have a 6-month period after leaving school or dropping out or going below a half time before you have to begin repaying. So if someone had just graduated in May, your payments would be starting in November. We call this a grace period. You only have one grace period per qualifying loan. So if you use this grace period now, later on you get another loan with maybe for additional education, you only have one grace period per loan. The federal government pays the interest on these subsidized loans. If it's unsubsidized, the borrower would be paying those. So the loan consolidation is one thing to be aware of. Often students find it beneficial to consolidate loans, but one thing to be aware of when we do consolidate loans, the grace period will probably be terminated. So if you're going to consolidate your loans, say in September, and you had planned on making your first payment in November, consolidation could make a difference. You may want to take a look at deferring your consolidation a couple months unless you want to start making your payments earlier. So just be aware that loan consolidation may be a good step, but it could well terminate the grace period that you're planning on using. So again, 6 months after school, before you start making your payments with the grace period, with a loan consolidation, you may well lose that grace period. So just make sure you check on that before you do any consolidations. Loans granted a grace period would be your direct subsidized Stafford loans are granted a grace period. Also, the unsubsidized Stafford loans are granted a grace period. Your direct subsidized grace period, direct unsubsidized. Notice in both cases with these unsubsidized, you may have a grace period, but the interest is still accumulating. So you're not making payments, but the interest is still accumulating. Your loan balance will be more when you start with not making payments during that time. You may have unsubsidized and subsidized federal Stafford loans. And again, in both cases, those are being extended a grace period, but the unsubsidized will be accruing the interest, which will be added to the principal you have to pay. Then we have Perkin loans that are also given a grace period. So all 7 of these types of loans are granted a grace period, which is 6 months after you finish school before you start making payments. Doesn't mean you can't make payments before the 6 months. It just means you're not required to until the 6-month period is up. Then there's some loans with no grace period. A Graduate Plus loan has no grace period. You need to make your payments right away. The Parents Plus loan also are not given a grace period. So these do not have the 6-month period that the others have before you start making your payments. Subsidized consolidated loans, again, you lose your grace period, so therefore you need to be cautious about consolidations because of losing your grace period with that. Also, your unsubsidized consolidated loans, again, you're consolidating those. With that, you're going to be losing your grace period. And then private loans, of course, home equity and those kind of things that do not have a grace period, normally you're going to start making payments immediately. As soon as you get that loan, they're going to want you to start paying within 30 days. So those are ones without a grace period. So it's important to be aware of what kind of loans you have. If you have multiple loans, which ones would include a grace period, which ones would not. Deferment. Another way you can take a look at it is deferring it. In other words, what we're trying to do is push off the repayment of principal and interest to a later date. So we're trying to delay those. You have unlimited deferment if you meet one of the following criteria. You're enrolled at least half-time in a college or university, so if you're enrolled at least half-time, you can defer your payments being put off to a later period of time. So it makes it easier. You're not making payments as you're a student. You're not going to have the kind of income you'll have later. You can defer that to a later period of time. And if it's subsidized, the government will be paying the interest. If it's unsubsidized, the interest will be accruing until you start paying that. Also, if you're participating in a graduate or a fellowship program or a rehabilitation program for the disabled, all those would also allow us to have a deferment. Again, deferring the payments to a later period of time. Again, subsidized means the interest is being paid by the government. Unsubsidized means you will be having interest added to your principal, and your principal balance will be larger when you do start paying that. Another way to postpone the repayment, or defer it if you will, is active duty during a war, military operation, or national emergency, and for the 13 months after active duty if you're a member of the National Guard or other reserve of the U.S. Armed Forces. We've obviously seen that happen a number of times where someone's going into the reserve or in the Guard, and so having their payments deferred while they're doing the military action for the government. There's also a limited deferment for borrowers that have a maximum cumulative time of 3 years if they meet one of the following criteria. So these are limited deferment, not long-term, but limited for the following situations. First, during a time of unemployment or inability to find a full-time job. So not expecting you to make payments while you're not employed or only working a part-time job. So that gives you a limited deferment. It won't happen indefinitely, but at least can give you a little bit of a leeway in finding that job, and it's something you can take advantage of. Also, during a time of economic hardship, if your income is less than 150% of that federal poverty line we talked about based on your family size, that also allow you a limited deferment, putting it off for a period of time which you wouldn't have to make the payments. Or if your income is below the federal minimum wage rate. Most of you that wouldn't be the case, but if that was, that'd be another time when you could have a limited deferment for making your payments. You would be able to put those off to a later date. Notice in either one of these cases you're going to have difficulty paying it, so the government's making allowance to allow people to pay these back at a more reasonable basis. We have forbearance. If a borrower can't make their scheduled payments or doesn't qualify for deferment, their loan servicer can grant them a forbearance. With a forbearance means the borrower can stop making payments or reduce the monthly payments for up to 12 months. So in this case, if you've had a payment, say, of $300 a month, and you work with your servicer and they say, we'll accept $120 a month. You can do this for up to 12 months. So if you find yourself in a difficult situation, either finding your first job or maybe between jobs later on, you're still making payments, you can approach the borrower and discuss with them the possibility of having forbearance, which gives you a little leeway if you're between jobs or you're just working part-time. It gives you a little bit of breathing room to be able to make those without putting yourselves in a financial bind. Mandatory forbearance are circumstances where the loan servicers are required to postpone. Notice the previous one we just talked about was the voluntary, where the servicer didn't have to. With mandatory forbearance, the servicer now is required to delay those or postpone those payments. A medical or dental internship or residency program. If some of you are in some sort of a program dealing with these residencies, it's allowing a forbearance on those cases to put that off, especially as we have more nursing graduates. We'll probably see more of those. We have medical or dental internships or residency, which will allow you forbearance while you're taking those courses. Also, the amount owed in a 10-year period is 20% or more of your monthly income. They're saying it's too high, you can't really achieve that, so they're allowing forbearance for that as well. Or if the borrower is serving in a national service position for which they receive a national service award, so there's an opportunity of someone receiving a national service award, they'd be able to also defer their payments. Several different opportunities, and those are mandatory. The servicer has no choice in making that election. We also see, remember the National Guard called up to active duty by a governor. Also, there's forbearance required there. Or the borrower is performing teaching service that will qualify for teacher loan forgiveness. I have a daughter that did Teach for America, and Teach for America was started about 30 or 40 years ago, and it's helping in some of the very difficult areas as far as finding teachers, inner city, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, Newark, and those kind of places, that a person teaching with Teach for America has some loan forgiveness, and therefore they would have this forbearance while they're waiting to get that taken care of. They have so much forgiven based on each year of service. One of the interesting things with Teach for America, it's not just for education majors, although many of them are education majors. It could be anyone that wants to provide 2 years of service, helping be able to meet the need in some really difficult area in our country. Also, if the borrower qualifies for partial repayment under the defense programs, we'd see forbearance there as well. Discretionary forbearance, when the loan servicer decides that whether to grant the forbearance or not, any request to postpone or lower the payments will not fall into mandatory. So things such as illness, financial hardship, bringing the borrower current, so if someone's behind their bill, be allowed to be able to allow them to bring their payments current, or administratively. So those are some discretional forbearance that the servicer is allowed to be able to work with people to make sure that the payments are made in a timely manner. Next issue that is often raised is, what about loan consolidations? Loans that are available to be put into a consolidation. First of all, subsidized loans. Your subsidized federal Stafford loans can be consolidated. Also, your direct subsidized loans can be consolidated. Your subsidized federal consolidation loans, or your direct subsidized consolidation. So all of those can be consolidated. With a consolidation loan, what we're doing is we're simply taking multiple loans, putting them together, and making them one loan. The advantage of doing that is you have much less hassle taking care of several different loans. You're not making multiple payments, and you'll be able to possibly reduce your loan interest rate and be able to help yourself make them more manageable. So, because if you have different loans at different rates, it's going to cause more of a hardship. If you can consolidate, you might be able to improve your rate as well as be able to help yourself with making it more manageable. I had a student back a few years ago did a presentation, and my understanding is that you can only do one consolidation, so you may want to wait till you're done with all your education before you consolidate, because you don't want to consolidate and find out later on you wish you had added some other items in that. So consolidation is something to take a look at, but we need to make sure when you do that you're doing it in a timely manner. As we mentioned previously, with the loan consolidation, one of the issues, if you're using your grace period and you consolidate, usually your grace period will go away. So be cautious before you get your consolidation, before your grace period is finished, unless you want to start making your payments immediately. And we have some unsubsidized loans that can be consolidated. Your unsubsidized and non-subsidized federal Stafford loans would be included in the unsubsidized, direct unsubsidized, unsubsidized federal consolidation, or direct unsubsidized consolidation, your federal plus loans, your direct plus loans, your direct plus consolidation, your federal Perkins, and your Health Resources and Service Administration loans. Those are all unsubsidized loans that could be consolidated. Consolidating them, you can do that with private loans. Either Discover does those, DR Bank, Citizens Bank, or students with high debt-to-income ratios and good credit can get their loans paid off with a lower interest rate by using private loans. So again, you need to look at the interest rates. Right now, interest rates are quite low. Maybe it will be worthwhile to look at consolidating before interest rates move up. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates this last year. They're looking at continuing to raise them, probably not significantly, but probably 1 or 2 more quarter-inch jumps. With each of those jumps, we're going to find interest rates going up on loans. So be aware, as time goes on, your interest rate will likely be higher than it is currently. So something to factor in your determination. With the private loans, we have some negotiation strategies that borrowers can use. Often, especially they use these when they're behind in their payments and they want to work out lower payments. So they often negotiate lower payments. If a person's struggling with the amount of the loan, possibly consolidate or renegotiate for a longer period with lower payments. Or as was mentioned previously, you could have graduated payments. Lower payments in initial years, assuming your income will increase as time goes on, you'll be able to handle the higher payments later. But with doing this, be aware that as you've paid lower payments initially, there'll be more interest in total because you're not paying as much principal on those early years as you would have otherwise. So your total interest will actually be more with a graduated payment than it would be with a fixed. Somewhat similar to making your house payments. If you make higher payments in the early years, it makes a difference in the interest being charged from then on. Because the interest is computed based on what the balance is still outstanding. If your balance is paid down, you're going to have less interest. So therefore, you're better off as soon as you can make those payments. But if you find yourself having difficulty with it, you can renegotiate or get lower payments. Be aware there will probably be more interest in total with doing that. The credit can be negative impact. To be aware of is private companies can sometimes charge costly fees. So you can use private companies for consolidation, but be aware of what their fees are. If you don't read the fine print, you could end up with some pretty significant fees on those. So make sure you read very carefully what the cost is going to be. These companies are in to make money, so they want to help people, but unfortunately sometimes the cost can be fairly significant. Also, there can be no guarantee the lender will accept a lower payment. So if you do consolidations, it may be different than what you currently have as far as repayment, because if you change your lender, it'll be under the new set of arrangements, not the ones you originally had when you took out the loan. So if you change your lender, you're looking at new arrangements. That's not always bad, but you need to be aware that they are not required to accept the lower payments like your first lender may have been. And also settlements for shorter repayment plans, usually 3 years. You can do those where you can pay it off more quickly. Of course, the advantage there, of course, you're having it paid off, but the cost of actually being able to do that. Consolidation after graduation and upon employment can often be better because you've got actual better terms, you've got a job. If you're trying to get a consolidation loan, it's always better to have a job first. It's going to make it more difficult if you don't have a job, because obviously the one loaning you money is interested in getting their money back. If you're already employed, you're going to be in better state to negotiate a rate than if you're not working. If you're not working, they're taking a chance that you'll get a job, and they're more likely to charge you a higher interest rate. So try to make sure you have a job before you work the consolidation. It should make a difference in the amount of interest you're going to have to pay. And there's some recommendations that are often made trying to help people pay off loans. As we mentioned, the amount of student loans people have is pretty significant, and how do we take care of those? One of the things that we can do is several suggestions here as far as getting your loans repaid in a more timely manner, in a way that would help you financially over the long haul, is to make payments bi-weekly. Bi-weekly payment is simply taking the monthly payment and paying it every other week. The advantage of doing that, you have 2 extra payments per year. You make 2 extra payments per year, but you're used to doing that, it'll pay your loan off more quickly. It's true of any loan you would have, whether it's a house loan or car loan. If you can pay it off more quickly with a bi-weekly payment, you're going to be able to save yourself a lot of money in doing that. Again, if you don't, you're paid bi-weekly, that gives you twice a year, you're going to have an extra check. But here's a way of having an extra check being used to reduce some of your loan. Also, round up payments. If your payment is for $461.33, round it up to $465. At $465, obviously you've got $3 paid extra every payment. You're going to be paying off your payments in a quicker period of time. You can do an Excel spreadsheet. If anybody's had any accounting classes or get on Excel and figure out how to do an Excel spreadsheet, you can kind of play around and find out what happens when you make extra payments. because we can see making extra payment helps. Maybe you get a tax return, you can apply an extra $500 to $1,000 for your tax return. You can use that, and that $1,000 payment now may make a difference of $1,500 to $2,000 later on. Especially if you go out to 30 years, extra payment now will have significant benefits. So if you can make those extra payments, money that you hadn't previously planned on with your tax return or some other form, can really make a big difference there. If you're paying off loans, one benefit is if you have multiple loans, pay the ones with high interest. So high interest would be one way of cutting down the interest. Another thing to consider with this is a snowball effect. Some of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey, and his suggestion when you have multiple loans is pick your smallest loan, make minimum payments on everything but your smallest loan. Then with every dollar extra you have, put it on your smallest loan. The idea behind that is once you've paid the small loan off, it's psychologically very beneficial, plus you've eliminated one of your loans. And you take that, when that one's paid off, you apply it to the next smallest. And even though they may not be the highest interest rate, psychologically, it can really be a major benefit, feeling like you've actually made progress. If you have 4 or 5 loans, it might feel like you've got these strings, wrapped around you, keeping you all bound up. If you can snip those one at a time with the snowball effect, that may be a worthwhile approach. Also, refinancing, you might be able to get your interest down. So one of the things with consolidations or refinancing is getting a lower interest rate. Interest rates, like I said, are quite low right now, so it should be an opportunity, especially if once you get a job and you can use that for leverage, be able to get a lower interest rate. Or you could sign up for auto pay or e-statements, which makes sense because that way you wouldn't have to worry about writing the check each month. Often they'll give you better rates with doing that. Sometimes 0.25% can be cut off. Knocking 0.25% off your loan would really be beneficial. In summary, we can see that guaranteed student loans are a major part of people's finances. Some of the things I've read that have been the cause, or the effect of the large student loans we have, we see people now deferring buying cars, deferring buying houses, and renting longer, or even living with their parents longer because of having a large amount of GSLs, guaranteed student loans. And so one of the things we have to take a look at is how can we get away from that? And the way we get away from that is trying to pay off loans. One thing to consider, if any of you are in a situation where maybe people are getting married and you've got 2 incomes, if you could get used to living on 1 income, take the smaller of the 2 incomes and use that to pay off loans. I know if someone that had a major medical loan did that, and in a relatively short period of time they could pay off the loan and it freed them up to use the money for other things. So those are some things to be aware of with loans. Now we'll open it for any questions people might have.
So one question was, for those so if you do consolidate, so you have 5 little loans, you consolidate all together, can those still be deferred then if you were to do AmeriCorps or start grad school, or does it depend on the particular lender of that consolidated?
It depends on the lender. My understanding, once you consolidate them, they're going to come due.
Okay.
So if you're going to have those kind of things, you probably would rather just wait until you get it deferred.
Yeah.
Take good use of your deferment that way.
Okay. If there's a good chance of doing grad school, maybe wait to consolidate.
Yeah,
Okay.
Because then it'll be a larger amount of money. A larger amount of money, you might be able to work out a better arrangement. Because you have several loans coming due at different times at different amounts.
Mm-hmm.
That's the advantage of a consolidation loan. You can probably push out the payment some and make yourself a little more flexible.
And would you know what would a pretty competitive consolidated rate be right now?
Well, consolidated, looking at the plus loans right now are set at 8%. The private loans, it says 5.4, as well as home equity of 5.4. So you're probably in the 5% range, I would think.
Some of the range would be good.
If someone has a good income or has a good credit history, they're more likely to get a better rate. I know people are aware of interest, but basically the bank is obviously wanting their money back. And one of the best ways to do that is to show you have a good credit rating, they're going to get their money back.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to make sure they get their money back, they're willing to accept less interest.
Mm-hmm.
As you become more questionable, they're going to charge more interest. They just want to have enough interest to cover their risk.
Yeah.
And so I know in the bond market we call it junk bonds for a very high rate of interest.
Mm-hmm.
When someone's borrowing 95% or more, they can get the bonds, but they're going to pay a high rate of interest. Be somewhat similar with the loans.
Mm-hmm.
If you've shown a good payment history and you're showing good integrity, they're willing to work with you. If you have some issues or haven't made payments, one of the key things you find you're going to be having trouble making your payments is always to make the contact with them and say, I'm having difficulty, can you work with me? Back a number of years ago, when I was working in Akron, we had a situation with a rubber strike. Before the strike, we had 9 of our parents that worked at the tire companies. One of them contacted me and said, we're going to go on strike. I may not be able to make my payments. Can you work with me? I said, sure.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only one to contact me. He was the one who was best about making his payments. And I was happy to work with him because he contacted me. Some of the others didn't contact me and didn't make payments.
Right.
So if you find yourself in a situation with any loan as far as that goes, you contact the people, say, can you work with me?
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing, you're showing integrity.
Mm-hmm.
If you show integrity, people are willing to work with you. And the more we can show integrity with things, the more people, nothing else, are living out the concept.
Right.
I think of a situation this past week, which is a little bit embarrassing. I bought some building supplies, and we couldn't find part of the supplies we were supposed to have gotten. I went back and said, I didn't get them, and they gave me a credit.
Mm-hmm.
Later on that day, we were doing some more work, we found those supplies,
Mm-hmm.
materials. I took it back and ate humble pie and said, here it is, I'm sorry I messed up. But if you do those kind of things, you're showing integrity.
Right.
That, oh, this person, they may have trouble making payments, but they're going to do the best they can.
Right.
Very seldom do those people have trouble making payments.
Yeah.
And you find that lenders will just look for those kind of people. Because unfortunately, not everybody does that.
It looks like there's a couple other questions that Anna submitted. You can
Okay,
see
go
on the
ahead.
screen. So what advice do you have for determining how much to borrow?
Obviously, the stock answer would be borrow as little as possible. Borrow what you need. One of the concerns I have with loans, and of course if someone's graduated now, it's probably kind of late for that, is only get loans for what you really need. Because it's easy when you're 18, 19, 20, 21 to think it'd be nice to have enough money so I could take a spring break trip and I can go buy a new computer and those things, or I'd like to buy a new car, another car. And you can often use your loans for that, but if you're a little more frugal during those periods of time, you can find yourself in a much better stead.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the loans being provided are not necessarily just for education.
Mm-hmm.
They're for education-related things, and you can use that for pretty wide expanse. Keeping your loan amount and finding, can I do without this?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, it wouldn't be quite as convenient, but I could do without this, and then you find you have to pay that loan later on. Because otherwise you find out now when you're 25 and you're married and you've got 2 kids, and you think, oh my goodness, I wish I'd done things differently when I was in school. So trying to find that balance, you want to get the loans for what you need, but not getting loans for things that maybe you didn't quite need. I mean, the spring break trip is nice, but you probably could live without it because now at 25 you're paying twice as much for that.
Right.
And you're not able to do some other things with your family that you would like.
Yep. That's great. Can you decide to consolidate some of your loans instead of all of them? That's another question.
It's a good question. My understanding, again, from having a student do a presentation on this sometime back, that you get one consolidation. I guess you could consolidate 3 loans and not the other 2, but you'd have to ask yourself, wouldn't it make more sense to wait and consolidate all of them? If it's going to be a good deal to consolidate them, let's get them all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, when you're working with your lender, you're doing it with one person, not 2 or 3. I was just in a meeting this morning with someone whose fiance was in a situation where he made a phone call, got agreement for making a deferment, but didn't get it in writing. And a few months later, received a very large bill from the provider saying, you need to pay this amount. Of course, they're looking at some major difficulty. They then filled out the form and took care of it. One thing to be aware with these, make sure you get all the paperwork taken care of. If you do a consolidation, make sure you take care of all the paperwork so you aren't caught by surprise receiving a note in the mail you owe $10,000 or $20,000 on payments that you have not made. So you take a look at each situation. If you can defer, if you're not paying interest anyways, it makes sense to defer them all as long as you can.
Mm-hmm.
When you start paying interest, then you have to, if it's unsubsidized, you have to be more aware of that.
Right. Great. All right, it looks like there's maybe one more question up here.
Okay.
Can someone take out a personal loan at a lower interest rate to pay off a higher interest rate student loan?
Sure. One thing to be aware with that is one challenge with your government loans is that even if a person chooses to go bankrupt, they do not get rid of those.
Okay.
If you have a personal loan, a person were to go bankrupt, therefore that would be included in your bankruptcy. So that's one of the things that happened back a number of years ago is people would get all their student loans. On Saturday, they would graduate, they go in on Monday and declare bankruptcy. And if they got rid of all their debt, the government said, whoa, that was not the intent. So therefore, if a person goes bankrupt, they do not have those eliminated. So it's not something that goes away with bankruptcy. Not that someone should be looking at bankruptcy, but with a personal loan, they would have that flexibility. They wouldn't have otherwise. If you get a better interest rate, it'd be worthwhile taking a look at it.
Okay.
And one thing with it, If it's a private loan, your interest would be a factor because your interest on a GSL or guaranteed student loan would be deductible. If it's a personal loan, you probably would not have deductibility of interest. That's more of a tax issue. But you get, unless it's a home equity loan. If you had a home equity loan, that would be deductible. But if it's just a personal loan, although with a personal loan, it'd be hard to get a low rate of interest anyways. But if you have a home equity loan, you get better interest, and you can still deduct that for the home equity. If it's just a regular credit card loan, you can't deduct that. Where a regular loan, you can deduct it. In fact, you can deduct it even if you take standard deduction. So that's one thing. I'm now coming at it from the tax viewpoint to look at that. But a home equity loan, if you get a better rate, but a home equity loan also look at you're putting your house to risk. So you don't make payments, they can come back and take your house.
Right.
So each of those has pluses and minuses.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It looks like that is the last one. The final one was just if they can get a copy of the presentation. So yes, this is actually being recorded and will be put on the Spring Arbor YouTube page. So we'll send that link out to everybody that was part of the presentation. Wrapping up, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Globig, for taking the time to put together this very helpful information during an important time when people are just about to be paying off their student loans. Thanks to each of you for joining. We hope this has been helpful and encouraging. In the next few days, we hope to get a very short survey out to each of you so that you can just give feedback on this presentation, how you felt it went, and also just give any feedback on if there are other topics down the road that you think would be helpful so we can just continue to serve our alumni well. Have a great rest of the day, and save the date for homecoming, September 30th, 2017. Thanks.
Thank you.